people who voted Conservative were worried about the economy and they wanted change and the typical things that you would have expected this election. And the boomers, if you will, that voted Liberal were all about fear of Trump. Simple as. So I don't know. If I was Pierre Poilievre, I'm not. I can't honestly tell you what I think he could have done differently.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Jonny Says So, episode 45. And we have a guest tonight. It's his second appearance on the show. We have Patrick Manning of InFact. Now, Patrick runs a social media web presence called InFact. That's in-fact, where he posts pretty prolifically, almost daily. His posts are always on point. They're very pro-freedom, pro-individual, anti-globalist, and it's a pleasure to have you back on the show, Patrick. Welcome back.
Thanks, Johnny. Happy to be here.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so obviously we got something to talk about tonight, and that's the events of last week. I think it went the way many of us expected and feared that it would, despite, there was a lot of copium going around about a blue wave. Maybe Pierre Poilievre was going to lead the country to victory, but sadly we didn't see any of that. So before we get into the doom and gloom, though, of all this, is there anything that's positive about any of this?
Yeah, look, I think, like you said, we were all hopeful that maybe the polls would be, so incredibly wrong that a blue wave could come. Unfortunately, that didn't quite transpire, though something we probably can discuss is the polling. And while, it ultimately called, it called the day, they were still really wrong in a lot of cases, and it's probably something worth getting into. So I don't know if we call that a positive, but it's definitely a discussion point. The Conservatives gained 2.5 million votes versus what they had in 2021, added 25 seats, and have a larger share of the popular vote than they've had since '88.
Yep.
So those are distinctly positive. And really, if anything, sort of screams to how democracy actually functions in Canada and in the parliamentary system. And again, yeah, we can get into some of those meat and potatoes for sure.
Yeah, totally, man. The popular vote thing is really interesting too, because the Conservatives they were up against such an effective propaganda campaign. I want to say I've never seen anything like it, but we just watched something very similar play out in the States to a very different result. But it's something I haven't seen in Canada. Well, okay, fine. We saw a propaganda campaign through COVID, but I've never seen it ratcheted up like during an election cycle like this. It's
Look, you can say what you want about liberals or about left wing and that the machine, if you will, but if there's something they're not, it's stupid, and that is just the way that it is. They are very good at leveraging a situation. I think they played their cards very well. If their goal was to win an election, just a combination of Trudeau stepping down just when he did, proroguing Parliament just like he did, playing off of the anti-Trumpism in Canada, which is bigger, I think, than the anti-Trumpism in the US, which is wild. But anyway,
yep.
Just they played all of those factors to an absolute T, and they turned what I think most of us would have, bet our life savings on 3 months ago that it would have been a Conservative supermajority, into a Liberal, minority that there's recounts and stuff going on that you never know. There's still hope on the Liberal side that could turn into a small majority yet. So we'll see. Let's hope not. But they played their cards, and here we are.
Yeah, well, let's hope not, indeed. But that's a perfect segue into one of my next points. Is about the death of the NDP. Like they don't even have party status right now, man. Like they've just been completely decimated.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jagmeet Singh sacrificed his party for the greater left-wing cause, if that's how you want to put it. That's simply the reality in
And his
Canada.
pension. Don't forget his pension.
Well, no, he didn't sacrifice his pension. He got that. He got his pension. Um, but no, so like, yeah, I mean, the NDP has been absolutely decimated, but it's really not the first time that's happened. I think they'll come back reasonably strong, or as strong as the NDP ever really is in a given term. But they'll go from 7 seats to their 20 seats or whatever. I think in the next election, most likely, once they have a competent leader. Now that also depends, I suppose, on some factors, but I would have to think that effectively capitulating to the Liberals to the degree of you might as well join them, which is why this whole thing really happened. If I was a Liberal voter or an NDP voter, sorry, um, they have done nothing but kowtow to the Liberals for years now. So if you're going to vote that way, well, you might as well vote for the real thing. What do you bother vote for the NDP for? Just vote straight for the Liberals. That's all they are at this point, right? So, and Jagmeet Singh's been pretty clear for years now that effectively he'll do anything so that Conservatives don't get power, and he did it, and he played his cards. I don't know if I would call it well, but he played it so that the end result was what it was. But like I said, it resulted in the sacrifice of the NDP. So I would have to think that another leader that comes in will have to play those cards differently. Otherwise, the NDP will cease to exist. So I don't know that that'll happen. I think we'll likely get back to normal in that sense. But in Canada, where we have the sort of generally a three-party system, I mean, I guess there's kind of five, that get at least 1% of the vote. But Canada is a fairly progressive country, unfortunately. So the Conservatives really need that three-party system to play its part, to split the left as much as it needs to be split, right? I mean, 41% vote share for the Conservatives in any other time would have led to a supermajority.
Yeah.
But because the NDP fell completely flat and 90% of those votes went to the Liberals, well, the Liberals got even more share of that vote than they normally would have. So it's just the way the cookie crumbled this time. The Green Party also dropped candidates out of about 100 ridings strategically, so that was interesting. I was actually worried about that. If you know or are familiar with Marie Le Pen in France, she's, the sort of right-wing candidate in France. And last year they had a federal election, and she was effectively slated to win in a supermajority there. But the two left-wing parties basically came together and dropped out of each other's ridings in a place where they knew one was going to win to avoid the vote split again. So it ended up that the left-wing party, had more votes. So anyway, similar scenario, and yeah, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to your point that you said about because I've heard this sentiment amplified on social media and like echoed like even people I know personally. They'll say like they'll normally vote NDP, but they're going to plug their nose and vote for the Liberals. You said what's to stop them from just voting Liberal, but like what happens if the few remaining NDP MPs that are in there right now, what if they say what's to stop us from just being Liberal? Do you think there's a possibility that some of these people might cross the floor to give Carney the majority that he needs?
I mean, I don't know that it matters. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Either they wear Liberal stripes properly, or they're going to play that part anyway. And at the end of the day, he only needs what, 3 of them, I think, maybe 4 of them, to garner his majority. So I have, it's his coalition, if you want to call it that. The Liberal NDP coalition is much stronger now than it was because of the fact that there's only now 7 NDP MPs, and they only need 3 or 4 of them for to create that majority. There's still one Green, so now then technically you only need maybe 2 or 3 NDP, and then you might get the Bloc on board for different things occasionally, which means there's no problem. So the NDP aren't even needed as much as they were. So I think they'll play ball for the most part, and it'll be interesting. The Bloc might be the interesting ones, though. He's Blanchette is committed to sort of playing ball for about a year, I think is what his statement was. But like anything, that'll purely depend on the vote by vote, legislation by legislation. Of course, he's squarely looking at Quebec, so that'll depend. But yeah, anyways, I don't think it matters, Johnny. I think that those NDP they'll get their votes for basically anything that they need to do, and we're more or less in majority territory, anyways.
Yeah, well, the Bloc Québécois is definitely going to be they're going to be the ones to watch because they're going to be such a large voting bloc that could, depending on how they feel at any given point, they could bolster the Conservatives up or the Liberals. So,
Yeah, I mean they could. So the only positive in it is that there is a world, I suppose, where if the NDP decides to change course a bit, and if they want to course correct and not just kowtow to every single liberal policy, which might be devastating for their future. There is maybe a world where there is some kind of policy that the Conservatives put forward that the Bloc is happy with, that the Liberals, of course, are not, because it's impossible to get them to agree on anything, even if it's like water, equals life. I'm sure you would get disagreement on that if the Conservatives put it forward, but maybe the NDP MPs, are willing to vote with the Bloc and with the Conservatives on an issue here and there, and that allow either liberal legislation to get blocked or a conservative motion to actually pass. It's not impossible, but because that NDP margin is so thin, it only takes a couple of people either way. So I don't know. Interesting times ahead, but yeah, I'm not terribly optimistic about the next few years. But what do you do?
yeah, absolutely. And like to the whole what hinges on the Bloc, the Liberals have essentially stolen all of the Conservatives' best policy positions and put them up as their own. And this is something we could talk about. It's something different entirely, but like people just have seemed to have eaten it up. Like all of a sudden, overnight, like you said on our last interview, a switch has been flipped, and then all of a sudden, the carbon tax is bad. It's costing us a lot of money, and pipelines. All of a sudden, like Mark Carney, he's been running against he's been anti-pipeline. Well, sorry, anti-pipeline in Canada. I should clarify. He's fine with
Of course,
investing them
yeah.
in other countries, absolutely.
Right.
But he's been doing everything in his power to stifle energy production in this country until the Trump situation happened, and then all of a sudden he had to pivot and sort of promise Canadians that he was going to allow us to be self-sufficient with our energy. But the Bloc Québécois is a big, they're a big roadblock to that because they've said over and over again that they don't want pipelines going through their territory, right? So if Mark Carney's going to make good on his promise of actually delivering energy projects to the East Coast, then this is going to be quite the stalemate for them, I think.
Yeah, since the election, since the actual election results have come in, Carney has said a few things that actually don't sound too bad. Um, you know, he has talked a lot about energy independence and that sort of thing. He's not, at least from what I've heard specifically, I've not heard him explicitly say yes to pipelines. But if you read between the lines, it's pretty hard to be energy independent if you can't get Alberta energy to market, which pretty much means pipelines. So I don't know how that plays out. I don't know if he's just sort of saying things to appease people and make people feel good for now, but over time, as the months roll on and kind of nothing happens and no pipelines are built and there's nothing happening there, I think that's a real possibility. Maybe there is a possibility that with sort of all of the Trump in the U.S. stuff looming, that he does make some moves or some concessions on the energy or the climate front, however you want to frame that, and obviously allow some energy to get to market, because without that, I mean, the U.S. owns us, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. So we'll see. I mean, if anything, I'll give the guy a chance to govern before I make a sort of final decision. But it's pretty hard not to read a book by its cover when the guy literally has books telling you all about his worldview and that sort of thing. And I mean, he's pretty much the poster child of an elite globalist, that's just pro every storybook leftist, insert whatever cause here, that a conservative wants to vomit thinking about. So we'll see. We'll see what plays out on the ground. I mean, hey, if it's not as bad as we think, then I guess we can call that a win as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't want to be right about this stuff. Like, ideally, I'd like to look back at all this in 2.5, 3 years and just be like, wow, I was really unhinged making all of these videos. Like, life for my children is great in this country. Like, that's really all I want. I don't really
Yeah.
care what, at the end of the day, we can't be looking to governments to save us, though, and that's the problem, right? Like, what bothers me about Mark Carney is he's a central planner. He believes that like everything from in an economy should be planned from the top down, and historically, I don't think that's gone very well. Um, it's interesting times for me because like I'm slowly evolving to become more and more right wing. Like I was a hardcore leftist when I started out. Like before I could even vote. You know what I mean? Like I cut my teeth in politics in the ninth grade when I watched two planes slam into the Twin Towers. Like before that, I was just, you know what I mean, like smoking weed and chasing girls and stuff like that. And then when that happened, I was like, wow, like the world is a really dangerous place and things like this can happen. And all of a sudden, people I know might have to go to war and die. Like I was thinking about that at 14 years old, and I've been interested in politics ever since. And yeah, I've just been leaning. I still consider myself like a small L classical liberal, but I've been moving more and more towards the conservatives lately. And Pierre Poilievre was the first politician that I've been genuinely excited about in Canada since Jack Layton. And that was when I was too young to vote. And my worldview has shifted a little bit. And it was really disappointing to watch Pierre Poilievre take what was like, should have been a supermajority on a silver platter to this.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's hard to touch on everything you just said there, but I mean, I agree with well, it's nothing. Most of it was just your telling the story, I suppose. So, but I can see myself in a lot of that for sure. I mean, back when I was younger, certainly back in in 9/11 days. I mean, yeah, that's probably when sort of politics came into a lot of our lives, I guess. And of course, most of us take all that for face value. So I think a lot of people and a lot of younger people typically grow up on a more liberal way of looking at things, and of course social justice and everything has become front and center in more recent years. But a lot of people say that it's not that, and Bill Maher actually famous for saying this: I didn't leave the Democrat Party, the Democrats left me.
Yep.
Sort of meaning that I've always been in the middle, somewheres in the center. It's just that the liberals are now so far left, it makes me seem farther right, but really I'm just the same as I always was. It's just, the parties that used to represent those beliefs don't really exist anymore. And you have that disparity, right? Like liberals used to be just to the left, conservatives used to be just to the right. And it was easy to sort of find the middle ground. But now, the liberals have gone way to the left. And in fact, there's, basically there's what the Greens, the NDP, and the Liberals really. I don't know. Is there a difference in any of their policies realistically? I think they all just want the same thing, which is just big government and extreme, left-wing social policies and climate change, yada yada. I don't see any difference between those parties, and they're all roughly the same on the spectrum, the political spectrum. If anything, the conservatives have actually veered a bit left over the years because they're filling a gap around the center, I think. And then you really don't. I mean, other than the PPC, of course, is the sort of the staunchly right party. So yeah, I feel like I've probably stayed the same, though. I think is just a matter of grinding your feet in the ground with all the things that have happened over the last 5 to 10 years. I've probably shifted to the right more just naturally because I have such disdain for what's going on the left. But classical liberal, I think, in a perfect world, is where the bulk of people exist.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and the Conservative Party, I know what you mean about them like veering to the left. I feel like that was a conscious decision on their part. It's been a lot of people were doing a victory lap when Carney won, and they were saying that Poilievre didn't do enough to get like centrists and people like slightly to the left on his side, but I would say that he did everything in his power to do that. It's actually crazy how like out of his way he went to like to disassociate himself with some of his more like hardcore supporters. It's
Yeah, and I've tried to be a little bit more pragmatic on my thoughts about this because, and I'm sure you've seen enough of my posts on the subject over the course of the last few months, and I've gotten very upset with Polyev on a couple of occasions on
as you should though.
his.
As you should. Like I
You've got to hold them to account, but I mean, listen, like his stance on Ukraine, for example, I detest it. And there's other things, but that was one of the biggest ones, and he's been pretty staunch on that. I don't agree with him at all, and I don't know how much of it he agrees with, whether that's his honest in his heart position, or that's his politics, realizing that you know that's what he has to play to win. And I think that's why I'm trying to not hold his feet to the fire probably as much as I thought I would if you had asked me this a couple of months ago, because actually a friend of mine, maybe it was even was it I won't say names, but someone I think we both know made an interesting comment to me the other day about how in politics there's two sort of strategies. There's a strategy for winning and there's a strategy for governing. And when you're in election cycle, your strategy for winning is all that matters, right? So I'm sure that he had strategists there that were like, dude, you gotta support Ukraine. Like that's it. If you don't, you're gonna lose 20% of the people on the left that might vote for you or whatever. So then he goes and you know does that because at the end of the day, as much as I don't support, it's not that I don't support Ukraine. I don't support Ukraine. I don't fly a Ukrainian flag like I'm a moron.
yes.
And just that factor. I mean, I don't want anyone to die. I'm pretty easy on that. Just stop dying, stop the war, whatever. But do I think we should just keep sending money and arms to Ukraine? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. But I also understand that in progressive Canada, that is a minority view, and you're not likely going to win shouting PPC slogans from the rooftop. It's just not the way Canadians are built. So this is a long-winded way of me saying I don't know how much I blame Pierre Poilievre for the current situation. I think a lot of things came together in the Liberals' favor. Again, I think it's hard to um, talk negatively at the fact that he got not only a higher vote share, but literally millions more votes than the last was it O'Toole or whoever was running in 2021. So I don't know what more he could have done. I think just the whole Trump thing, I think, threw things over the edge. I think I don't, and I've said this, and it's very hard to articulate this properly, but I don't blame Trump. Like, I'm not mad at him, but I do believe the result is because of him. I do believe, and I don't know if he was being strategic and he wanted the current result, or if he just kind of doesn't care and he just wants to say what he wants to say, and however the chips fall, they fall. But at least the way that he's been talking since then, it sort of sounds like this is kind of the result that he wanted. And maybe he's got, like Trump typically does, plays his like 5D chess. Maybe there's a move there that he understands why it's preferable to have, Carney or a liberal in power versus Pierre and the Conservatives. But anyways, we can talk about that in a minute or something. But the point I'm trying to make ultimately is that Pierre ran a strong campaign. He got a ton of votes. He gained a ton of seats. But the collapse of the NDP isn't his fault. And the ability of that left wing machine to take the anti-Trumpism and really just froth it to the top. And as you see in the numbers, I mean, the boomers are the I hate using those terms, but that's what everyone's using, I guess. So,
Oh yeah,
the
I'd like to
55.
preface this for any boomers that watch my channel, because this is like the top thing I get in my comments when I raise this. I know it's not all of you. There are some based boomers. I appreciate you. It's not all of you. We know.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can't ever paint anyone with the same brush, but the numbers are clear, right? First of all, it's insane. It's insanely positive that the under 30s voted in favor of the Conservatives by a fair margin.
Yes, that never happens.
The
Like,
Never happens, right? So they're always it usually goes the opposite direction. The older you get, the more the line goes up to conservative. But it was literally inverted in this election, which is why I think it's such a weird one, and I don't think it'll be replicated next time. Um, but you've got your young people, your not middle age, but you're up to your 30 to 55s also voted conservative, but your 55 plus was staunchly liberal this time, and that was and if you looked at the polling that was done, the people who voted conservative were worried about the economy and they wanted change and the typical things that you would have expected this election. And the boomers, if you will, that voted liberal were all about fear of Trump, simple as. So I don't know. If I was Pierre Poilievre, I can't honestly tell you what I think he could have done differently to try and own that fear and have that fear be a positive thing for him, like it was a positive thing for the liberals. For whatever reason, the people, the 55 plusers especially, think that the liberals are the ones that can deal with Trump somehow and are going to save us from Trumpism and from becoming the 51st state. And I guess Pierre didn't maybe talk strongly enough about that, even though again that was one of the other things that I got really annoyed with him by, because he just basically said the same thing but in less strong words than them. And maybe that's the one thing he could have done differently, is create some separation so that he didn't just have to be like, we will never be the 51st state, blah, 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 and maybe reframe it to separate himself so that, obviously the point being that, of course, we're not going to be the 51st state, but also trying to recognize that maybe read between the lines and don't just take Trump shouting at the TV at face value. Like the military isn't coming in anytime soon to make us the 51st state. And I think there's people, like a lot of people out there, that actually think that,
oh
oh
yeah,
my God, if I don't vote a certain way, like we're going to get taken over and we're going to literally be voting in the next US presidential election. Like
oh yeah.
it's mind numbing to me how simple people are, honestly.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head with your last point there about that. Like, it's not hyperbole in these people's minds, and I think it's all in like it's in the 55 plus CBC watching demographic. Again, guys, I know it's not all of you boomers. Actually, I was looking at my YouTube metrics the other day. About 30% of my viewers are over 55. So like, yeah, I'm
No, that's awesome.
aware it's not all of you, but yeah, no, I'm talking about this specific camp of older CBC, CTV watching boomers living a sedentary lifestyle with their house paid off. They don't want for much, you know what I mean? Maybe they
Yeah,
don't
this guy on the news, remember him?
yeah. Yeah, the Brantford boomer.
The
Oh my
Brantford boomer,
God,
yeah.
the memes that were coming out of that were so good, man. But yes, no, this demographic were I honestly think you're right. They were actually terrified that the United States was going to invade us. I don't know what they were picturing in their minds, like if they were picturing like rockets going into Windsor from Detroit or whatever, but like
Right.
yeah, like which it is funny though. I mean, if the states actually wanted to, they could probably take us in 2 days. It wouldn't take long for them to run through our military, but I think you would have an insurgency on your hands. I don't think it would be very easy
You
after
get
that, but
guerrilla warfare and everything else. It would be about as fun as trying to win in Afghanistan. I would gather, but um, you know, uh, again, it's just foolish talk, right? Like, I
yeah,
mean,
it's
I
silly.
I, I just I don't know how to even otherwise think it. But like the people that were intelligent, which was I guess at least 41% of the population, um, they realized that you know no matter what you feel about Trump, whether you love him or hate him or could care less, that he's just being a bit of a buffoon, like he often can be, and just saying whatever comes to his mind and poking the bear and whatever. But it takes a special kind of asshole, quite frankly, to think that that rhetoric and that situation is what was most important and most pressing for Canada, and not just the absolute devastation that has been brought upon us over the last 10 years, completely destroyed our housing market, completely destroyed our economy, have the second worst economic growth out of whatever, like the top, 30 sort of Western developed nations, and the one above us has more than double the growth. And it's just shocking. It's totally ludicrous. And then people just put all of that to the side and said, no, we've got to defend ourselves from America, and they voted that way. Like I have a really hard time, you know, just getting anywhere near being able to put myself in someone's shoes that thinks that way. It's just absolutely crazy to me. But like you said, a lot of these people are the older, comfortable lifestyle, house paid off or nearly paid off. They don't really care. I mean, the housing crisis means nothing to them. They have their house. It is what it is. If they sell it, they're actually going to get more for it than they would have 10 years ago or whatever. They don't leave their house, and it just doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. Whereas the rest of us that have to, work and want to buy a house, and of course, the younger you are, and that's, I guess, probably what plays to the conservative advantage in the future, is, unless this actually does get turned around, which I doubt it will in a short enough period of time, that the younger people, um, they can't ignore the reality of their life, right? They can't ignore the fact that it's literally impossible in any metropolitan area for a single person to live in an apartment on their own. It's not possible. You'd have to make $150,000 a year, to pay rent on your own. So you have to live with random roommates or whatever the case might be. So, anyways,
Yeah.
some hope for the future, but we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, well, totally. Like, and to what you just said about, it's not going to change anytime soon, like in the next couple of years. I don't think anybody who supports the conservatives even wants to go down that road right now. Nobody wants another election right now. If somehow like Mark Carney loses the confidence of Parliament, which isn't, when is it going back? Like end of May? So what is that? Like 9 months without like 9 months like
Representation.
without representation. Am I
Yeah.
gonna like get a larger tax return next year because of this? Like, what are we paying for at this point?
No, but they'll get a raise because they just got one. So there's that.
It's unbelievable. But like, not to get bogged down in that. What was my original point there with
Yeah,
Parliament?
well, just not no one winning an election anytime
Yes,
soon.
thank you. Yeah, nobody. I don't think anybody wants to see that. Like the conservatives would get decimated even if Mark Carney loses the confidence of the House. Like, whoever, if they manage to trigger a non-confidence vote and call an election, like I think for better or worse, we're just gonna have to suck it up for let Mark Carney talk. Let
Yeah,
him.
I think we need him. I think we need a minimum of 12 to 18 months, to see what happens, right? And then, of course, once the Trump stuff slides into memory, um, and it'll then just depend, right? I mean, if the Liberals actually do something positive, and not keep going, and bringing in 2 million immigrants a year, and still not doing anything positive for energy and whatever, if that continues to happen, then the more time goes by, the better that is for the conservatives. But I agree, if an election was called in the next 6 months, not enough is likely to happen to warrant people switching their vote. So it would be an utter waste of time. um, but Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not even sure what I'm hopeful for at this point. I mean, to me, and people will think differently, but my only two things I actually care about right now are immigration and energy. That's it. Immigration will take care of just about everything else, because the reason why we have a housing crisis is because we have an immigration crisis. There might be some other small factors at play, and I'm sure if you have people that are like super in the know about all the little real estate nuances and stuff, would probably give lots of different answers. But at the end of the day, anything that has to do with pricing has to do with supply and demand, and it's unequivocally true that the supply is dwindled and the demand is through the roof because our population has grown drastically in a short amount of time, and that's just something that it can't be managed, right? I mean, Canada, I think, was it, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's something like 11% increase in population in 4 years, I believe, which is enormous, right? I mean, it's literally millions of people,
Yeah,
and that has to stop, right? I mean, and I liked Pierre's, at least his general policy and rhetoric on it, which is that it would simply be tied to the ability to sustain them. If that means that, we only get 10,000 immigrants in 1 year, then so be it. If 10 years from now we can allow a million in because we can support it, then, fine. But we need jobs and healthcare and housing and all of those things to support people, not the other way around. And the reality is, as well, talking on the immigration front, is I think most of us are understanding that immigration is important. It's what, of course, immigration to some degree is what the West is I say built on, if you will. But economic immigration is really important, and that means, for example, that if a person comes into the country and is approved, forget refugees, that's a different thing altogether, but an immigrant that applies to come to Canada should be a net positive to Canada.
yeah.
That means that there's a job that we can't fill, or something like that. If we're short on doctors, yeah, bring in some doctors. If we're short on engineers, yeah, bring in some engineers. But when you go to McDonald's and every gas station and basically everywhere else now, and the people that are working in these jobs can barely speak English, and that's not rhetoric, that's just true. Um, that's a problem for me because I don't understand. I don't understand why we're flooding in millions of immigrants that are of no economic value to Canada. We don't need people to work at corner stores. We don't. My son is 16 and literally can't get a job. And I'm not saying that that's why. I don't actually know. We do live in a rural area, so it's not as plentiful. But he's applied to lots of places in the A&W locally, in the gas stations and stuff. And he's a smart kid and has his CPR and all that. Not as so much as a phone call.
Well, yeah, that's
So
sorry to cut you off there. Definitely finish your point because I want to see where you're going with this. But like that's like such a coming of age thing, and like for the longest time, like I can think back to my youth. You know what I mean? Like just walking around my hometown as a teenager, hanging out with my friends. You know what I mean? Like, oh, so and so has to work tonight. You know what I mean? There'd be teenagers working at the movie theater, teenagers working at McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like, all of these places, especially at night, would just be staffed with kids. And then like their manager would be like the older lady who just like is a retired school teacher, you know what I mean? And it's
yeah,
like and at a certain point a lot of these jobs actually did need to be filled. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Like I used to work in restaurants, right? And it was like a decade ago that like if you were a chef, good luck finding a good line cook. Like there was a point where like we actually needed a temporary foreign worker program to fill some vacancies in restaurants. You know what I mean? Like there weren't enough people that wanted to work those jobs. Like it was like
mm,
over a decade ago now. It was like to the point where we're like, okay, we need to, and like usually the restaurant association would have to lobby to the government, and they would say like, oh, we need workers, and the government would look at it and be like, you're right. You know what I mean? Like Nova Scotia is getting like 400 people from the Philippines, 100 from India. Boom, there you go. You know what I mean? And it was very reasonable. And yeah, like now it just seems to just be the floodgates are open, and And like I again, like I don't want to disparage any of these people. Like they're victims in this too. You know what I mean? Like I have no hate in my heart for any
Oh, I don't
people that
blame
like
the people. God, if I was
yeah,
them, I'd
like
come here too. Why not? What if you're gonna,
absolutely.
it has nothing to do with them. It has nothing to do with them at all. It's government policy, right? It's government policy. That's the problem. And we could probably talk, in great detail about maybe why we think they're doing this, but at the end of the day, they there's massive fraud in the educational system where people are going to schools that I don't even the schools may or may not exist, but they're basically just trafficking immigrants into the country under the guise of a student visa, but they're not actually going to any of these schools, right? So, and Trudeau actually acknowledged that at one point, I think, and said that they would put a stop to it, but I haven't seen any evidence that there's been any stop put to it. And then you've got Carney, who recently stated that he would cap student visas and foreign workers to something like, what was it, 5% of the population, I think, 2 million people or something like that. But there was a few comments I saw that is essentially already what we're at. So basically, we're just going to sustain what we already have, which is like, well, we have a problem. We need less people, not the same amount of people. So, but anyway, so I mean that's a problem, and I know some people will, of course, think that as soon as you even say something about immigration, that it's somehow racism or whatever. But stuff like that doesn't bother me because I think you're a moron if that's how small your brain is, that you can't understand the nuances of a conversation like this and
yeah.
just want to call people racist because you think less immigration should happen. Canada is for Canadians. U.S. is for Americans. Spain is for the Spanish. Uganda is for Ugandans. And anyone who comes here, it should be for a privilege. It should be to benefit that country, and full stop. No one has a right to be here except for a Canadian. And a Canadian isn't a euphemism for white people. A Canadian is a euphemism for Canadians, people that were born in Canada, whatever color and creed you might be. I don't care. It's not about that. But it does mean that if you're from India, Pakistan, or England or the Netherlands, you don't just get to come to Canada and stay here because you feel like it. And again, it's not that isn't actually what's happening, because you can't do that. There's obviously there's reasons why it's not generally people from England and the Netherlands that are coming. It's people from more third world or developing type countries.
Well,
And
that's
so
an
of course they're
interesting
going to want to come.
comparison you brought up too, because like nobody would accuse anybody of being racist. Like, let's take the elbows up crowd for example. Like all of a sudden, like if you were to just be like, hey guys, like did anybody notice that like over the last 5 years, like there's more and more Americans now? Like it seems like 20% of any person you bump into in the street is a new arrival from America. Like our culture is being replaced by America. Isn't that great? And like most people would just be like, no, that's not great. You know what I mean? Like it's just a universal truth. Like it has nothing to do with the
Right.
color of anybody's skin or where they're from. Like like we need doctors in this country. You know what I mean? Like if you want to bring like the if you want to bring in like 2,000 highly skilled Indian doctors, sure, have at it. You know what I mean? Like if you're if you're operating on my heart or fixing my broken leg, I don't give a shit what color you are. Like,
No, I just want you to be good at your job,
yes,
and
exactly.
available. And that's what, like, exactly, if we need surgeons and we cannot produce them in Canada, or we don't have enough or whatever, yeah, get them wherever you need to go get them from. But again, I, I don't I don't need McDonald's enough that you need to every position at McDonald's needs to be filled by a foreign worker. And at the end of the day, and this will perhaps be the most controversial thing that I'll say today, but again, I don't care because I just I know who I am, and that's all that matters to me. But like, I don't believe for a second that there is a single Canadian, not one, that in their heart of hearts would be happy to live on a street, that they grew up in, and all of a sudden, overnight, every other house around them was occupied by someone from a foreign nation, let's call it. And that isn't racist. That isn't anything. That's normal. That's natural. Why would you want to be replaced? There is a culture, as much as some people, including Trudeau and others, have tried
But
to sort of
we don't
denigrate
have a
the
culture here,
idea.
Patrick. We live in a post-national state with no core
Right.
identity.
100%, right? And that's, of course, exactly that mentality that allows for the apathetic nature of Canadians to almost allow this to happen, and actually people almost fighting for it, or at least fighting for anyone who would say something like I just said. But we all know that that's true, even if you won't admit it. There's no one out there that would choose to live in a community that their every single neighbor around them could barely speak their language. They couldn't go over in their garage and have a beer because they didn't even know what that was. It didn't even make any sense. It's just not what you do. It's different. And I don't care. Like, if I wanted to go to India or Pakistan or any of those places, I'd actually love to. I'm an avid traveler. Would actually genuinely love to go visit those places. I think it would be incredible. But if I wanted to live there, I'd go live there. If their immigration system would allow for it, of course. But and the same thing, and it's the same thing. I mean, every species in the world. I mean, you don't see, tribalism, if you will, is a natural instinct, not just for humans, but just for people like what is the same, right? That's pretty natural. Any species likes what is the same. I'm sure dolphins probably hang out more with dolphins than they do with sharks. Do you know what I mean? It's just the nature of beings. So it's not unnatural, racist, or anything else to say, yeah, I'd kind of prefer to be around people that are kind of like me. And I don't mean that in a colored sense at all, because I have no doubt that there's plenty of people from India and Pakistan and Lebanon, in fact, that have been in Canada for generations. And fine, all good. You're Canadian. Cool, no worries. But that isn't the same thing as having a bunch of people that have been here for like 10 minutes, and you used to have to be able to speak English to come into the country, on an immigration visa. And honestly, I had a washer and dryer from Costco a few months ago, and two guys came. They were both of what I assume is Indian descent. One guy could speak decent English. The second guy couldn't speak a word and was translating, with the other guy what was going on. So to me, that's like, I don't understand that. Genuinely, I don't understand how you get approved for a visa to come to a country that you can't speak the language in. I don't think that exists anywhere else. I can't imagine you could go to most other countries and get a visa to live and not be able to pass some kind of a language test, because I'm pretty sure that used to be the case in Canada. I'm pretty sure to immigrate to Canada, you had to be able to speak basic English or French, and that is categorically and clearly not the case anymore, because they've just made it a lot easier to bring people in. And again, people really have to sit down and they have to have a hard think about why that might be. What's the reason for it? Why would you bring in 4-ish million people over the span of a few years when we have no place to house them? Local people can't get jobs. Our healthcare is already in crisis across the country. And our economy is, like I said, very low growing economy. If just being a totally rational person, what's the positive in it? Please tell me, how has this benefited Canada in one singular way versus all of the negative and all of the stresses that it has caused on our main resources and our general way of life? Like, can someone answer that question? Is anyone able to give a coherent answer as to why it is a positive thing that we have allowed, in some cases, 1 million plus people a year to enter our small, what used to be a 36 million population country? I don't think that there's a person on earth that can answer that question, because I don't think there's a rational answer.
Well, I'm hoping Mark Carney will be able to answer it, because he's a big fan of the Century Initiative, right? That's this idea of increasing Canada's population to 100 million by the end of the century. We're barely above 40. So that's exponential population growth piled upon exponential population growth. That is more than double, right? Like,
Yeah, so I did that math recently, actually, when I was looking at some of these numbers. It's been a few months now, so I don't have it handy, but it's something like that the rate of population growth that has existed in the last 5 years, which has gotten us to the current point, will absolutely have to continue, or I think possibly even move ever so slightly higher for the next 75 years to hit that goal. So if that is a goal, which I assure you it is, it's absolutely the goal, and it's precisely why the last 4 or 5 years has happened and why it will continue to happen.
Well, no, it
There
is a
is
goal.
zero
It's
chance
not a
it'll slow down.
conspiracy theory. I've heard people I've heard people publicly say that like this you say Century Initiative and they say, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." But like it's a stated goal. Like you can look this up. These words have come out of these people's mouths. It is a
Yeah,
stated
yeah.
goal. And
Well,
sorry,
Tim
I
Houston
didn't mean
has
to cut you off there because you were on a
no, no,
roll.
no.
But like you
Tim
were talking about
Houston for
the
Nova
math.
Scotia, Johnny. Tim Houston has said it outwardly. I don't know that he's used the term Century Initiative, but he has outwardly stated the goal of doubling Nova Scotia's population to 2 million people. I don't even know if that was by 2100 or that's supposed to be
No,
by
that
like
was sooner. That was sooner.
2060.
I
Yeah,
think it was
2060 maybe, something
2030.
like that. No, no, I don't think 2030. That would be crazy. That would be actually impossible, I think. But regardless, it doesn't matter. The point is that this isn't something they're hiding. They're just giving maybe crazy reasons why it's the case. But I can't imagine looking into the future and thinking about the simple difference from 36 to 42 million people that has happened in the last several years has made in my eyes, a significantly negative impact on Canada from a number of inputs, whether you want to talk, culture, employment, healthcare, housing, pretty important things. And I don't see positives in any of those things. I mean, I don't know why it's so important that Canada's population grows by that figure. I mean, it's fine to want to grow a little bit. Of course, you want to keep pace with, you know, other markets. I mean, if the US is going to grow by a certain amount, and if other Western nations or countries that you trade with are going to grow, obviously you don't want to continue to be a smaller and smaller economy over time necessarily.
No, especially
But
with
just
the boomers that we all love. They are getting older. You know what I mean? They're retiring. They want to stay home and watch CBC. So they need they need people in the paying taxes
yeah,
to the
the
coffers,
CTP
right?
needs to get topped up somehow.
Yeah,
But
exactly, right.
but
Which
like, look, the reality is that we would, I'm sure it would be amazing if we could sustain our own population like we used to, and then bring in, like I say, some quality economic immigrants like we have since the dawn of time. But at the end of the day, everyday Canadians are not going to be reproducing at a replaceable level as long as life sucks. That's just how it works, right? You know, some of the interesting, right-wing pundits have actually done some really good content on this. The likes of the Charlie Kirks of the world and whatnot have talked about this at length, about how if you want America to grow, what you need to do is create the environment that people want to have kids in, and they want to bring someone into the world, and that it's affordable to do so, and that you're not so strapped for cash at 30 years old that you can't even own a home. I mean, of course, that's back in the 50s and 60s and even 70s and whatnot, when it was just the man working and at a factory job in Detroit or something, and they owned a house and a car and a white picket fence and 3 kids, and life was grand. And now, 2 incomes doesn't cut it for the most part, unless you're, both friggin' doctors or something. But,
yeah,
life is just a very different place. And again, it's not like it's not on purpose. This is, these are economic policies over the course of decades that have gotten us to this point, and some of them over the course of just the last decade that have escalated things even worse. So that the more broadly speaking terms, I'm really not hopeful, because I think that that's why you see so many of the same things happening across Western nations. That's why whether it's in the U.S. when Biden was president, on the left wing side, Canada currently, and in the last 10 years, you look at what just in general the things that are happening in Britain with Keir Starmer as the prime minister. and just whatever, just country after country. You can look at all the craziness that's going on, and it's all leans into the same thing, right? And of course, I mean, you can talk about conspiracies all we want about the likes of the Agenda 2030s and the UN Sustainable Development Plans and the migration pacts and all that, but they're all there for you to read. The data's there. They always tell you what they're going to do. It's just most people never actually read or look into it, so it just sounds like a conspiracy. But if you actually read the documents that these international organizations put out, and then of course we give millions and millions and millions of dollars to these organizations, and we typically sign on to these various pacts or whatever. You can sort of see it play out, but you'd have to do a modicum of research to understand that. Otherwise, you just have NPCs calling you a conspiracy theorist, and then they go back to watching their 10 minutes of CBC, and that's all they understand of the world. So,
Yeah, totally. As for your point of, or well, your question rather about like why would they be doing this? Like, nobody's able to tell us why. Like, what would their motive be in destroying their own country? Like,
yeah, well, they don't care about the country, Johnny. I mean, they've proven that for a long time now. That they're not. They're post-nationalists, right? They've even said that we're post-nationalist society. So they're uh, they are loyal not to the country but to the almost the elitism itself, right? Which is globalist in nature, and at the end of the day, um, a country in chaos is a country that's easy to control. It's as simple as that, right? And our country's in chaos, and most of the West is in chaos. Do you ever notice how none of this is happening in like developing countries, right? It's right now. It's the powerful countries. It's the country where the money is. It's the country where the power is that are slowly and methodically being dismantled and destroyed at the cultural level. And over time, you probably, what I would say is their perfect world, whether it happens or not. I guess, we may not be alive to see it because these things do take time. But you end up with effectively a homogeneous society that is effectively the same everywheres, you know, um, and no one has really anything in common. There's not really a majority. Something else that is, I think, a taboo subject, it seems, for some insane reason. But like, what makes a country a country? And that's a good question, right? Like, what makes a country and not just a piece of land that you might as well just throw a bunch of random people on? What makes a country, I think, is pretty well evidenced is common culture, common morals and values, common language. That has been the case since the beginning of time. That has been the foundation of every country on earth until now. And if you erode those things, then you erode the fabric of a country. I think that is just objectively true. And someone could try and argue that, but I don't know what argument you could put forward. But so if you take a country and over time you reduce the language commonality, you've got, instead of one dominant language or two dominant languages, you end up with 10 or 15 and no one speaks the other one and whatever. And of course, with language comes culture. So again, you bring in so many people, especially so quickly, that aren't really looking to assimilate, or you're not really doing anything to help them assimilate. And you end up again with people who live beside each other that have nothing in common. They're not visiting. They're not eating dinner at each other's houses like neighbors used to do. It's a different world, especially in the cities. And so, yeah, you take all those, and the moral thing again, and they're all part of each other, right? From language comes culture, from culture comes morals. Every single Western nation was built on Judeo-Christian fundamental values. And I'm not a religious person. I don't go to church. So it's not about that for me. It's not about a deity. It's just about the foundation of what life is about, what it means to be a good person, respecting each other and respecting men and women and whatever, just the different things that make up the moral foundation of people that have typically come from Western countries. And let's be frank, that's not always the same as from other countries. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. I'm not trying to denigrate a culture from countries in Asia or the Middle East or whatever. But I think it's fair to say it's different. That the way they look at the world is different. Their values might be different, and
Their
that's
values are
good for
different,
them.
and like if the coin were flipped, you know what I mean? Like like even if you had the numbers, you know what I mean? Like even if like let's say Saudi Arabia just decided for some reason that they wanted people from North America to just come in, and you know what I mean? Like if just the roles were reversed, you know what I mean? Like culturally over there, like people wouldn't like imagine if you just had a bunch of liberals coming over here and be like women should be able to drive. You know what I mean? Like come on
Yeah,
guys, like women like they wouldn't tolerate that. You know what I
no.
mean? Like if we went over there and just demanded women started driving, like it
Well, like I said, everywhere else in the world, that's an excellent example. And Japan is actually another one because it's probably the most closely related one to us in the sense that they're very much a Western democracy of freedom and free markets, and they're always deemed to be like a very hospitable people and whatever. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but they are staunchly pro their own culture, and their immigration is very tightly controlled, and they do everything that they do in their country is all about preserving their heritage and their culture. Japanese is for Japan is for the Japanese, and it will remain Japanese, and I think that's perfect. I love that. So, but again, that's obviously true for nearly every country on earth right now
absolutely.
today. That is just the case, and it's no one would argue that, but yet for some reason the majority Western nations, are not allowed that way. We have to be self-loathing. We have to think our culture doesn't matter. We have to call ourselves racist if we even think that saying something about another culture coming in is somehow bad. And again, you have to think of, well, why is that? Why are they not trying to destroy um, Middle Eastern cultures or African cultures or Eastern Asian cultures? Why is it only Western nations that seem to be under this threat of? Um, I mean, it is just replacement. I mean, it's not a conspiracy. It's literally just the numbers. If all of a sudden in Canada now, 4 million people are here from, say, Indian descent, and 10 years ago that was only 1 million people. I mean, I have no idea. I'm throwing numbers out there, but let's just say that that's roughly the case. You can't say that that isn't replacing. Then it is. It's a higher majority of the population is now this foreign culture that didn't used to exist at that level. So, I'm not getting into replacement theory and all that, but the simple reality is the less the native population exists as a percentage, then your culture is going to be diluted. And as soon as your culture becomes diluted, your country becomes less of a country. You lose that fabric of society that stitches everything together. And again, that's why Saudi Arabia doesn't welcome 1 million Canadians to immigrate to them every year, and Japan doesn't allow 1 million Chinese to immigrate there every year because, you know, it's about Japan first. And that's it. And that's the way a country should be. But, in the post-nationalist globalist world, our prime ministers, our presidents are no longer, their job appears to no longer be to put the country first. It's to, I don't know, do some other thing that is somehow in the interest of the global community, and not in the interest of Canada. And I think I said this, I don't know if it was with you on the last podcast or I don't know, some other time recently, but I just made the point, from a globalist perspective, if your loyalty is to globalism and not to your own country, um, well, especially Canada. Canada is a small country. I mean, there's, like I say, only 40 odd million people, and a lot of those people aren't born Canadians. So if you're from a globalist perspective, well, there's 1 billion people in China, 1 billion people in India, hundreds of millions of people, 300 million people, I think, in Pakistan, or maybe it's 190 or something, but a lot. Um, and in many other countries. So if you're a globalist, well, the interests of what it effectively amounts to half the planet's population in just a few countries probably is going to be more valuable than the interests of a few tens of millions of people back home, because back home is just a place, right? It's just a place that they, that's it. So that to me it's become quite obvious that that is what's happening. I don't think you can argue with it. That's objectively true, unless someone can somehow present me with something proving my eyes, ears, and senses have been wrong for the last 5 to 10 years, and somehow all of the things that have happened are actually good for me, and they've made my life better in ways that I haven't been able to objectively comprehend. I stand by each of those words, and I could care less what names would ever get hurled at me for daring to say such crazy things.
I don't think you're ever going to get that explanation. I really don't. Like I've been trying to I've been trying to play devil's advocate in my mind a little bit, and like maybe try to come up with something like to justify all of this, but I just honestly I can't. The only thing I could say is maybe like, yeah, no, we need workers, but we don't need this many workers. Like you said, like when your son can't find a job, you know what I mean? Like it's yeah, it's it
It's
is what
tough.
it is.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, and going back to the political piece, I mean, I think a lot of people have seen this and many other things. I mean, there's a whole slew of things. I think most people are, in their everyday life, they're concerned about economics, of course, and just the diluted buying power that has happened so significantly over the last few years. But again, we just had an election, and we really had a real opportunity to make a change. And unfortunately, we had just enough people that get duped by the Trump effect to that I guess they were willing to overlook the things that are affecting their lives. But I guess, like we said, we've talked about that. It's the people that maybe their lives aren't as affected as other people are the ones that voted that way. So yeah, we could talk in circles about that, I guess. But here we are.
Yeah, absolutely, man. One more thing I wanted to ask you was about the Trump effect. So obviously we know what happened. Donald Trump, inserted himself into our election, and he took a conservative supermajority and he turned it into a liberal minority. And you were sort of spitballing earlier about whether Trump had intended this or not. And like for better or worse, like he's taking credit for it right now. And like, do you think that's Trump's bravado speaking? Because like obviously like he's been talking like this the whole time. Like he made a couple of comments like recently, not recently, but like right around the 51st state becoming like a talking point. Like he said some sort of offhand thing about like, oh yeah, like Canada might have a good conservative. I don't know. Like I think it was October. He was on like some streamers podcast. I'm blanking on the name. It was like Neil something. It was a really weird show for him to be on. I think it was like a game streamer or something.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, this guy was Aiden Ross, I want to say, but this guy was like talking with Trump. They went on for like an hour and a half, and he was showing him slides of world leaders. And when it got to Justin Trudeau, he was like, "Yeah, people really don't like Justin Trudeau. He's not very popular. Like the Canadians have had enough of him, and like maybe the Canadians like." They need a good conservative. I think a conservative would win. Do they have one? I don't know. Like this was back in October. Like he seemed
Right.
to not know who Pierre Poilievre is, and
He may not. I don't know that I disbelieve that. I think that given that Polyev was not the leader, and Trump was not even the president, I think there would have probably been enough in the way that Trump could have cared less about anything that didn't have to do with an actual leader. Now, maybe he was playing a little bit of games. Maybe he knows the name or something, but I don't think that Americans much care about Canadian politics. I think they have to obviously have a relationship with the country and with the leader, but I wouldn't be that surprised if he wasn't really particularly familiar with the leader of a party that wasn't in government and hadn't been for some time. Um, that said, I mean, I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure with how to define Trump's motive with how things have gone over the last few months and his rhetoric and his input sort of in the election, if you will. But my general consensus is that Trump is typically 10 steps ahead, and I think he's proven that in a lot of cases. Um, and that leads me to generally believe that even if I can't see it, I have to believe that his words are chosen carefully with some intent, and that whether it's for the good of Canadians or not, I don't know. But in his own mind, I believe that he probably wanted a liberal to win. I'm just not 1,000% sure I fully understand why that might be. It might be as simple as he believes that they would be just easier to manipulate
Yeah,
and get
that's
what he
fair.
wants out of it in a negotiation versus maybe a stronger conservative. If they got a strong conservative majority, Canada sovereignty, rah rah, that it would be more difficult to maybe get into our dairy market or whatever he wants out of it. You know what I mean? He just might think for his own benefit. Yeah, it's probably just Carney's an idiot. Let's get him over here. He'll lay down for me, no problem. And maybe he knows Carney. And there's some evidence out there that they've done some business together, even maybe in the past, or at least have some mutual interests. So they're probably known to each other. I mean, Carney, obviously being a governor of the Bank of two different countries and a billionaire himself, I'm sure they've crossed paths before in the business world. So sometimes the devil is better than the devil you don't. So yeah, I have to think he did it for a reason. I'm just hopeful that in the end that reason turns out to be not a total loss for Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. But either way, Patrick, I don't think it's either way. I don't think it's going to end with American troops crossing the border. I don't think that's going to happen,
Trump
man.
just said that the other day. In fact, I think was it yesterday he met with Carney. He literally, it was pretty clear even in that meeting that it's just yeah, Trump thinks that we would be better off as the 51st state. We probably would be. If you want to just talk practically speaking, in economic metrics, we probably would be better off with a U.S. dollar and paying U.S. taxes and funded entirely by the U.S. That's not me promoting the 51st state because I mean, there's lots of good reasons why you'd want to stay a sovereign nation, of course. But Trump being Trump, he's just he's saying, yeah, I mean, what we're gonna stop subsidizing you, with that $200 billion surplus, and it'd probably be better for you guys if you were a state. He's just literally saying what he thinks, and I think he believes it, and
Yeah,
I think and I think he's got a lot of valid reason to believe it. But I also think he fully understands that it's not going to happen, and it's not his intention. He doesn't actually think in the next 3 weeks or whatever, as he bargains with Carney on USMCA and that sort of thing. There's no misunderstanding there that Canada is not going to become part of the U.S. and we're not going to be voting in presidential elections anytime soon. But he's not going to stop him from saying what's on his mind. Um, but like, well, why don't we flip into Alberta for a second? Do you have any you want to discuss Alberta and
I
the
do
thoughts
actually,
of?
and it's funny because we were just talking about the 51st state, and I was gonna say they don't want us. Like I really don't think America wants to take all of Canada on. However, they
No.
do want Alberta.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like if all of a sudden Canadians revolted and we demanded a referendum about joining the states, sure, they would take the entire country. They would happily. Well, I mean, Trump would, but like, would it be a smart move for them, really? Because, like,
Voting wise, I don't think it would. I think it would be a problem if you add, I don't know how many
well, we're a
eligible
giant
voters.
frozen California, is what we are. We're snow
Right. Yes.
California.
Correct. So you add 25 million voters, of which uh, 55 to 60% are going to vote typically on the left. That doesn't help Republicans get elected anytime soon. So yeah, I don't think maybe a territory like Puerto Rico or something would be better suited for uh, for
Well,
Canada. But anyways, that's
in
that's
this
just where we come
hypothetical
from.
world that exists only in the mind of CBC watching boomers, I would imagine that's exactly how a 51st state scenario would go. I don't think we would get federal voting rights. I think there'd be some sort of trade off there because most Canadians would want to keep our failing healthcare system. It's so like
Yes.
so Puerto Rico is actually I'm glad you said that. That's actually a perfect example because if I remember correctly, Puerto Rico has universal health care, right? But they're not covered under the U.S. Constitution, and they don't vote in federal elections, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah,
like
that's
they're
correct.
part of the states, but they're not. I feel like that's how it would go for us. Again, in this hypothetical scenario that's never going to fucking happen. But
Right.
yeah.
Right. I mean, and the only way that I guess, there's, I mean, I think there's probably like economic ways you could force the subject, right? Like I'm sure the U.S., if they really were hell bent on it, they could probably cripple us economically to the point of submission. I just don't believe that that's the intent and that's what's in the cards, right? I don't think that I think Trump just genuinely wants a better deal. He wants a fair shake. He's not happy with the fact that, you know, we put loads of crazy tariffs on U.S. goods to avoid them from coming into our dairy market and in our financial sector and that sort of thing. And they don't have the same problems, coming across the other way. So I think he's just sick of that thing, not from Canada, from everyone, right? I understand why he's doing the tariffs thing. He wants a better deal for the U.S., and the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world and has the leverage to be able to do this. Other countries couldn't. Spain couldn't put on a tariff war. No one would give a shit, about Spain. Um, they would just get their whatever they get from Spain elsewhere. But the United States, and Trump actually very boldly said this yesterday about, he's basically saying that the U.S. is like a luxury shopping mall, and you're going to have to pay if you want access to come and shop in it. And by what he means is, if you want access to our economy, our people, if you want to sell goods to the United States of America, you're gonna have to make it a much better deal for America now, because let's be fair, no matter what, the United States is the economy. China doesn't exist if not for the United States economy. That's where the bulk of Chinese exports of cheap, shitty items are sold and consumed in the United States. So that's why I'm sure in the coming days or weeks at best, Xi Ping, whatever his name is, will be on a flight to the U.S. and will figure out that negotiation once his ego dies down and realize that his country is in turmoil because all of a sudden all of his factories are no longer supplying anything to the U.S. because of 140% tariffs. So the U.S. can do it. Most other countries can't because they don't have the luxury of being the United States. So Trump's going to leverage that to create, an economic situation that is just in the interest of the United States, because as the president of the United States, that's his bloody job. His job isn't to make sure that some other country is taken care of. His job is to make sure Americans are taken care of, and for that, I respect the hell out of him, even if it isn't good for Canada.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Um, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome, but I'm definitely mad at what he did to our election. That's for sure. Like, oh man, yeah, he played the boomers really hard, man. Worse than a scam phone call asking you to pay your CRA account and Amazon gift cards. You know what I mean? Like he got them good. But yeah, I do actually want to talk a little bit about Alberta. Because this is a really interesting development. You've got Mark Carney being officially winning the election, so he's solidified. We're stuck with him for a few years, and all of a sudden, overnight, it just seems like Alberta is had enough. They're seriously talking about holding a referendum, and Danielle Smith has made it a lot easier for them to do so. Um, yeah, so what are your thoughts on that, man? Like, do you feel like this is something that could actually be a thing that happens? Or is this all just talk? Like, again, is this like, Alberta's equivalent of art of the deal stuff, to get Ottawa to the table?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think there is an element of that from Premier Smith's perspective. I think that lowering the threshold from what I think was 600 and some thousand signatures to about 177,000, I think that's definitely a power play. She won't admit it, but I don't. I also believe her when she says she doesn't want to separate. She's been clear on that. She doesn't want to separate. She wants to be part of Canada. I don't think she wants to be her own country, or I don't think she wants to be part of the U.S. I do think however, she wants to take whatever leverage she can use against the federal government to gain a better deal for Alberta. And again, for that, I actually respect the hell out of her for. And I do think that she is by 1,000 country miles, the I mean, it's sort of a generic to say the best, but the best premier in Canada by any measure that you could possibly use. Just as far as someone who is A, actually conservative, and B, seemingly willing to, have the tough conversations and do what needs to be done that seems to be genuinely in the best interest of her people, and not just, the type of lip service you see from the likes of the Doug Fords or the Tim Houstons of the world that are just, puppet politicians like most of the rest of them. So yeah, I don't know what'll come of it. I mean, I watched her press conference and I watched the question period. She's really good on the mic. She's really good at making it clear, at least trying to make it clear that, she's not purposely like lowering the thresholds, just so that a referendum can happen. But also it's kind of clear that, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's going on. Because why else would you just do it now? But it's also, I think, the right decision, because forget this referendum specifically that's likely to happen. I think that, if you're going to have a process like Alberta has for citizens to be able to get a question on a ballot to vote, it's a pointless process if a threshold is so high that you're never going to do it. Because the difference is you have to have a certain number of votes or signatures, and you have to have them in a certain amount of time. And it's something like currently 600,000 signatures in 90 days or something. Like, do you know how impossible that is for a regular person to be like, hey, I want to do this thing. How am I going to get this survey to 600,000 people to get them to sign it? Like, that's insane. That's unheard of in any context.
Honestly,
right?
man, even 10,000, and like, never mind the world with access to the internet. We're talking about your province. You know what I mean?
It's only 4 million people in Alberta, right?
Yeah,
It's not a huge province.
even 10,000, I think, is like that's a very steep target to reach.
So 177,000 people being the new target, and I think they've extended it to 120 days is the time frame. That's still a massive mountain to climb. So it's something still has to be pretty darn popular, to get to garner that. So regardless of anything else, this isn't me, promoting or endorsing separation. I just think that decision in a nutshell is the right one. If you're going to have that kind of a process, it needs to be accessible, and this certainly makes it more accessible, but still a high threshold. So the second piece of this is, do I think it'll happen? I think the referendum likely will happen. I think that there is enough disdain in that province right now for how they've been treated for a long time, and rightfully so, I think, that a organized, concerted effort will be able to reach that signature threshold that is required. Do I think in a referendum Alberta votes to separate? Not even close. I think you're probably talking 60+% will vote no, and that'll be the end of it. But it would be nice if the signatures happen and the process starts to move forward. If it turns out that Carney starts to play a little more ball, or the energy markets get opened up a little bit, a pipeline gets built, something positive happens out of it, then we can take that as a win. But man, like it's just crazy to think about how all of this has been done purposely. Like, us being from Nova Scotia, we all know dozens of people over time, hundreds even, who spent years back and forth from Alberta, Fort McMurray, just booming, right? Going out making $150,000 in 6 months, and then coming back, going on EI or whatever, going back and doing it all over again, living a crazy life, buy a huge truck, just country boys, doing their thing, and rural guys in Nova Scotia, just doing that, right? And that boomed for years and years. That was just the way that life was. and it was a good life. And Alberta was booming, Canada was booming, Nova Scotia was booming as a result, and all of
Yeah,
that
like
was literally
just
taken
something
away.
small like that, like you said, like it truly did make our economy better. You know what I mean? To have these young guys like go out there to work, come home, they would invest in property. They would, you know what I mean? They'd invest in property, fix it up, get a nice place for their kids to live, and a lot of that's going away.
Yeah, because we have trillions of dollars of resources sitting under our feet that were literally being stifled and not allowed to sell to the world. Like it's even crazy. Like when Germany came over, essentially was a year or 2 years ago, maybe it was now. Even I don't think it was that long, but basically begging us for natural gas, and we're just like, nah, now we're not going to give you natural gas because climate change or something. So instead, we just destroy our own economy and our people and whatever. But these people can gloat that they were saving the world, um, and some of the population is here for it.
I don't understand why they're here for it though, because the hypocrisy is just so out in the open. Like, to your point about Germany asking us for natural gas, right? And we're just like, no, no, because of climate change. These same people are like, support Ukraine, blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. That was like the single, like, that was, nobody talks about it. It
Come
was a
on, Johnny,
big,
that was Russia.
yeah, it was, okay. They blew up, okay, but who benefits? Who benefits, man? And
No, it
so,
wasn't Russia.
no, I'd be willing to hear an argument for it being Russia. So like
Yeah,
what's
there's
the
no
what's
argument for
what's the
that.
strategic benefit in like blowing up your own
Your
ability
own
to
pipeline, yeah,
yeah,
of course. There's no benefit to that
yeah,
whatsoever.
absolutely, yeah. But like that was a huge environmental catastrophe. That's like objectively like one of the worst, it was worse than the Valdez, it was worse than the Gulf oil spill, back in the
Look, it's the
2000s there
same
like
thing as them all taking private jets to Davos and stuff like that. Like, it's just ridiculous, right? It's like literally you just say dumb things and then go and do whatever you want, and climate is no issue. Like if you were a genuine person, who for whatever reason believed that climate change, as far as it being an existential threat to humanity and the Earth itself, exists, and we literally need to do everything we possibly can to stop it. Otherwise, sudden death and all of that. Um, in what right mind would you then be like, oh, by the way, I'm just going to give this speech about this, and then go and jump on this plane and burn 10,000 gallons of fuel in the next 3 hours while I run off to LA for fun, for some fundraiser or whatever? Like, it's incoherent, right? Like, it's not in tune with the way any real person would act if they genuinely believed in that thing.
oh the
So the only
oh
well,
the planes thing is like what you said like we've all heard that one before like it's so obvious like well it should be obvious to everybody but it's not like like you're going to a climate summit you're all flying private and you're lecturing us proletariats down below about our carbon usage well like but I covered this like last month or something but the climate summit that's going to be happening in Brazil in October, I shit you not, they are cutting down protected Amazon rainforests to build a highway specifically for these people to get to their climate summit. Like that's actually like a real environmental issue is the Amazon rainforest because like,
yeah,
you know, what takes carbon? Let's go back to grade 4 science. What takes CO2 out of our atmosphere? What benefits?
trees.
Yes, trees. And the gold star, gold star. But like the
Yeah,
Amazon
thank you.
rainforest it's like objectively, it's one of the more important real environmental causes on planet Earth, right? Like it's actually like the lungs of our planet.
Yeah,
It should be protected. That's real environmentalism. And they're cutting down parts of the Amazon to build a highway for their climate conference.
that's I never hadn't heard that, but that's the greatest. That must be the single best form of hypocrisy on the climate change front I've actually heard.
Yeah,
That's unreal. I love it.
it came out like last month or something. BBC did a big article about it. I actually I made a little video about it actually. It's like a month back. If you Google BBC climate highway Brazil, you'll find it. Yeah.
I will definitely look that up
Yeah.
tonight because that's
If I
sounds
can
like
remember
something
it, I'll
I'd like
send
to
it
read
to you.
about.
Yeah.
But anyways, but that's like, it's stuff like that. I mean, it's like anything. I mean, I remember watching a really good, like, it was kind of like a TED talk or something a couple years back. I don't remember who the guy was, but he was like some bigwig CEO or something. But he was like, forget all the rhetoric, forget all of what people say. Like everything else in this world, follow the money, right? Simply follow the money. And his point was, if climate change was as they tell you and was such a threat to, coastal regions and just all these things, do you think there is any world where the largest real estate developers spend tens of billions of dollars putting up brand new hotels and resorts all over the coastal areas of the world on a yearly basis? Does that make any sense to you?
Nope.
That they would do that if they thought that in 50 years that coastline was going to be gone? No, of course not, because it's ridiculous. And it's the same nonsense that they've been pumping into us for, the smart people that, actually remember back in the 70s and 80s when they were told that, climate something or other, global warming, was going to, kill us all in 10 years. And they would do that every 10 years. And then 10 years passed and literally nothing had changed whatsoever. And then they stopped calling it global warming because it stopped actually warming. And the temperatures really aren't hardly increasing anymore compared to what they were 50 years ago. And now you've got, recent reports of, ice in the Arctic is now reforming again. Like it's almost like the things that happen are just cyclical in nature. And we play very little impact in those. And it's also, I say, a well-known fact. That's not the right term. It's a fact, not well enough known, that the level of CO2 in our atmosphere today, if you look back, I forget what the measure is. I don't know if it's billions of years or certainly hundreds of millions of years, is actually on the low end. We're
Oh, for
nowhere
sure.
near the highest amount of carbon dioxide. So this idea that if we just get rid of every ounce of carbon dioxide, the world will somehow be better and less warm or something. Like it's, if you start when you start talking it out, like it just sounds insane, right? Like it doesn't, none of it makes any sense. But of course, the average person doesn't talk it out. They don't look into anything. They just listen to what's berated into their brain all the time. And if you just repeat the same thing over and over again, it's the same thing as truth, right? Truth is, reality is nothing more than perspective. And if your perspective is, that climate change is an existential threat, and you hear that in your brain 32,000 times a month for 10 years, then you simply believe that climate change is an existential threat. And nothing that anyone can say, no evidence that you can point someone to will change that. So that's another part of the reason, right? We're human, as humans, we're our own worst enemy, right? It's so easy to be controlled. And that's been proven, whether it's climate change, whether it's COVID, whether it's Trumpism or TDS, like all these things, it's so easy to get people to follow anything you want. And I know I talked about the switch, but that's there is a switch, but there's also the longer game, right? And climate change is the big one. I mean, they've been playing that game for like 50 plus years now, and here we are with the world that's in great shape. Um, Zero evidence that there's um, like people talk about the rising oceans and stuff like that, but and there is maybe some evidence that there is a little bit of that happening, but again, at the end of the day, can someone point me to a place on Earth that no longer exists or exists significantly less than it did a few decades ago, that is a direct result of um, the ocean rising, which is then a direct result of ice melting? I don't believe you can. I mean, I know my family has had a cottage in on the Brule shore of Nova Scotia since 1952, and yeah, has a little bit of erosion taken place over time? Yeah, it has. But in 75 years, that front lawn looks mostly the same as it did then. Maybe a foot or something has been taken off of it, but the beach is still there. The lawn is still there. The cottage is still there, right on the water. And I'm pretty confident that that's the same place in every beach all over the world. And Yeah, I'm just sick of it, man. I'm just sick of all of them. I'm sick of how dumb people are. And I'm sick of how easy it is to prove a lot of this stuff is nonsense. But yet here we are with electric car mandates and whatnot. So
Yeah, and not just electric car mandates, but I think Carney was pushing some sort of idea where allegedly he's going to try to get all cars that were manufactured before the year 2000 off the road, which like
wow.
it probably it's not going to affect too many people, but man, there's some people out there still driving their
Oh man.
1990. Yeah, there's a few
A lot
people
of a
out
lot
there.
of classic cars out there, man. I own a 1999. I have a car as a summer car that actually would be impacted by that, and I'm
Is
willing
it
to
a
bet there's more
Toyota?
people than you think. It is not a Toyota.
Because those things are tanks. Like, there's probably
No,
quite a few people out there with like a 1998 Corolla that are just like, oh man, like,
no. But think about everyone with a '67 Mustang and stuff like that. Like, do they get exemptions because it's a classic car that they only drive 1,000 miles a
oh no,
year? Like,
I'm
I don't know,
sure.
but
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Like, I don't think he's gonna send jackboot thugs to your door to take your old car. But like, the point is, I think there's probably gonna be some sort of tax or regulation on it or something. But
yeah, you probably get you have to pay you know 5 or 10 times the annual registration fee to keep it on the road to go as a climate tax or some nonsense. But I mean, this is the nature of liberalism today, which is big overbearing government that has to make all the decisions for you. We know better. You're just dumb little people. They're there. We'll take care of it. Don't worry. Even though you're too dumb and stupid to understand that the climate is going to destroy the world, we'll make sure that we tax you to death and create all the policies that give you no freedom. And but we're saving you.
yeah,
Look, at the end of the day, I don't care the what the thing is. There is no better policy than personal responsibility and individual freedom, and those things are naturally occurring free markets, if you will, free markets of society that will take care of problems. Free thinking people with the right to do as they please, within the bounds of, you can't murder and the typical things. We don't need government regulations to tell us what kind of a car we can drive. If you want to persuade us, then persuade us. But you don't say that we can't, because that's just, you don't, if you govern that way, it's just a bad road to go down, right? The more regulation there is, the more rules there are, you know, it's less freedom, and the less freedom means less inventiveness. It means less everything, right? It's the reason why the West and the United States specifically is the most prosperous place on earth. There's no question. The correlation to freedom and prosperity is 100%. If you have no freedom, you have no prosperity. That's why many places in other parts of the world um, are strangled and can't get to Western levels of well, prosperity, because the people aren't free to do so. They don't have home ownership and land ownership rights. They're just not free to do what they want. And when you can do what you want, you solve the world's problems, and the world gets better. But for some reason, they think the world gets worse when we're left to our own devices. So they regulate the hell out of us. So anyway, welcome to
yeah,
2025 and technocratic Western civilization.
absolutely. Like, there's definitely there's some nuance to that thought too. Like, there's definitely unfettered capitalism can sometimes be, a boot on the people's neck, so to speak. But like, for the most part, like like you were saying, like a prosperous society that invents things. Once you take away somebody's incentive to create, nothing is going to get created. Like, if you're living in a society where like the government like says how much you can make, there's a certain cap on, like, let's say I start a company and the government comes in and say, oh well, that's too big. You're going to have to start giving away all of your rewards for starting this thing up. Then like, there's no incentive for me to scale up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, people have argued that for a long time, right? About how, well, there's no one needs to be a billionaire, no one needs that much money. They could feed the world with that money, and we should people shouldn't be allowed to earn more than five
X
million
amount of
dollars
money,
or
yeah.
whatever it is. And it's like, at if you don't put any thought into it whatsoever, then you're like, yeah, okay. I mean, fine. Of course, we could all just live on $5 million. I mean, that's lots of money. Then no problem. Elon Musk doesn't need $300 billion. Of course, he doesn't need it. It's not required for him to live his life. He could buy half the bloody world with that much money. It's not about that though.
Well,
It's about go find me.
if he wants to keep pumping out that child support, like he might actually need a lot of that money. But
Maybe he's not the best option, but no, but you know what I mean. Like if there was such a policy where you couldn't have billionaires or something to that nature, if you put some kind of a cap on that, then I guarantee you, SpaceX doesn't exist, Tesla doesn't exist, Microsoft doesn't exist in its current form. All these things don't exist because people's freedom to innovate and reap the rewards of that innovation are precisely why that innovation happens. And it's precisely why all of these companies that are the most valuable, most inventive, prosperous countries in the companies in the world, the vast majority of them are American companies.
oh, come on.
Because that's where
No,
the freedom
no,
is.
Patrick, I think you're being a little bit biased. All right? Look, you haven't mentioned one of the great, you know, one of the great things that have come out of North Korea, the USSR, or Cuba. You failed to mention any of the successes that came out of those countries. So what?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to think. Yeah, nope, can't think of any.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I can't actually think of any. And, you know, there's lots of oligarchs there too, especially in Russia. You know, where there's plenty of money. But you know, the picture paints itself, right? I mean, you know, where the fewer regulations there are, and there's going to be a bell curve to that. If you had no regulation, of course, there would be utter chaos, and you would have things like, you know, what happens in certain industries like the pharmaceutical industry, which isn't near regulated enough, and you know they can effectively kill people for profit's sake, and you know they make a measured decision on, yeah, maybe, you know, well, actually I'll twist that away from pharmaceutical. Do you know the story? This was typically told in school, I think, in economics back in high school. This is where I first heard it. So in the 70s, Ford had a car called the Ford Pinto, and the Pinto had a really bad tendency for the gas tank to explode if you got rear-ended in the right way, and you know you'd probably die. You don't want to, you know, gas tanks to explode. Bad times. And Ford, this is well known in public domain. Ford made a conscious decision, the Ford Motor Company, that it was going to cost them far too much money to recall all those vehicles and fix them, versus paying out whatever lawsuits might happen from people dying as a result. So they chose to not fix them. And there is, I think, you know, that probably blew up in their face a bit. I think there is more to that story that I can't remember all the details. But the point is that, you know, they're corporate greed and pure capitalism could certainly go wrong because humans have a pretty nasty nature at times as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not certainly advocating for the type of pure, unadulterated capitalism that means that there's just no one can tell you what to do or whatever. I mean, of course, there needs to be levels of regulations just to keep certain things in check and keep people actually safe, not figuratively safe like we say so much these days. But generally speaking, what we don't need is just ridiculous government regulations, like I say, that you know, serve no purpose other than to either A, make business incredibly difficult, or to take the freedom of choice away from people. Like I said, I'm all for regulations to make cars safe. You know, they have to have, you know, certain support, you know, certain subframe support, so they have to have blinkers and that. Yeah, of course, I agree with all those types of regulations. I don't agree with you telling me I can't have an internal combustion engine because you've decided something about climate change. What you should be doing is educating us if you think that there's something to educate us on, and then enough of the population will choose themselves freely to not buy internal combustion engines, and the market will naturally stop producing them if they can't sell them. That's what should happen, not government saying, nope, sorry, you just can't buy them anymore. Like that's the kind of shit they do in Russia to central planning of an economy. That's not free market, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. Central planning is really like central planning versus free market is what we just lost in this election, in my opinion. And I think I'm glad you brought up the climate change thing too, because as the Donald Trump stuff starts to wear down, you know what I mean? Like people are going to have fatigue for it. As long as we're not erupting into chaos as a society, people, most people don't work at a steel plant. There's a lot of people that are going to be negatively affected by this, but eventually it's going to leave the news cycle. And I think with summer coming up, it's only natural that somebody's going to flick a cigarette butt out their window and a forest fire is going to happen, as it has happened my entire life and every generation before me. And I think that that might be the distraction that they need to maybe walk back some of these policies. You know what I mean? Like, Mark Carney, why aren't you getting on these pipelines that you promised to build? Oh, well, we just had 3 forest fires in June, so we can't do that anymore. And people will just, the elbows up crowd will just eat it up. They'll forget those promises were ever made. And then we'll live another 10 years in poverty and wonder what the fuck happened.
Well, the elbows up people, I don't think want those policies anyways. Quite frankly, you know what I mean. I mean, the elbows up people are the same people who are rah rah on the climate change, and if you talk to them, are basically say they're willing to sacrifice all of their their conveniences to save the world. So those people I don't worry much about, other than I worry about them becoming too many to overcome. Luckily, like I said, we at least have a strong conservative base still in Canada. So we just need to figure out how to get that over the finish line. And the way to do that is to get the NDP back up um, to a respectable place, because we do need that. We need that three-party system, or we need longer, like over time. If it got to the point where we were just a two-party system, I think you would see that gap close over time. But I think in the short term, I think you would see it would be very difficult for conservatives to get in if you had effectively two parties vying for votes. And also, just to touch on the PPC quickly, because I have been an ardent supporter of them, um, but I'm increasingly, well, what's the best way to put it? Increasingly falling out of love with Mr. Bernier. I think that if that party has any chance to survive, they need to call a leadership race. I don't think that that's in the cards. That doesn't appear to be the direction he's going. So I'm pretty much switched off to the PPC at this point. I don't think that they have anything valid to say anymore. I think Bernier has run his course, and he's gone so far to the wrong side of the spectrum. At this point, all he is anti-conservative party. He's not anything else. He's not. He doesn't really talk much about the Liberals or anything. He's just, his whole party platform now seems to be based on just bashing conservatives. And I don't think there's any value in that. And I know some people have been saying that for a while, but for me, that seems to have ramped up quite a lot, just even in the last month, and it's continuing to do so now. So yeah, that's just for me as a had been a historical PPC supporter. I'm pretty much off that train unless something changes drastically for them.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that for sure, because I've noticed that myself. Bernier, like this whole election campaign, I don't think he mentioned anything about Mark Carney. It was always Pierre Poilievre this, Pierre Poilievre that. But I mean, a couple of his points I can't say I disagree with. He did call Pierre out for like his stance on Ukraine and not appearing on podcasts. I thought his interview with Patrick Bet David was great, about Pierre not. Actually, yeah, one thing I meant to bring up, a short little segue, but Rogan the other day came out on his show and he basically said that, he had personally reached out to Pierre's team about coming onto the podcast and he didn't want to do it. So, like, so yeah, like
Uh,
Maxime definitely has a point about like Pierre's strategy, but yeah, man, it just seems to be all sabotage. Did you hear that the PPC is considering running a candidate in the riding that? Poilievre
I
is,
did,
yeah,
and it's on the same vein, right? Like they have every right to run a candidate anywhere they want,
of course.
and I don't know, like I guess I don't even have a huge problem with that because unless they didn't run it, did they run a candidate in that riding in the general election?
That's a good question. I
If
don't
they
know off the
did,
top of my head.
there's no reason why they shouldn't run them again. Like, I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the conservative won with like 80% of the vote. The PPC is not going to impact that. The Pierre Poilievre will win that seat.
Yeah, but
So I
speaking of
really don't
sabotage,
care.
they're also talking about doing the longest ballot thing in that riding again, right? Like they're the same group that, you know, some say, in their opinion, sabotaged his Carleton riding with the like, the
Yeah,
now
I
famous
know
picture
exactly what
of.
you're talking about. I mean, I don't. Well, first of all, mathematically, that ballot that had no impact. If you add up all the votes for every candidate other than Pierre and whatever the guy's name is that won that riding, the Liberal. And if you so all of the votes for all the other 90 candidates or whatever, and you gave them all to Pierre, he's still nowhere as close. He lost by like 4,000 votes, and I think there was only I don't even know that there was 500 votes that were split between all the other candidates. So as much as it's ridiculous and it shouldn't really be allowed, in at least in the way that it was so obvious what was going on, it didn't impact it. If you actually look at it, and you're probably aware of this, but everyone is on the same page. Um, Pierre's riding isn't the same riding as he used to have.
Yep.
It's still called Carleton, but there is a large chunk in the northwestern part of that is Canada, Ontario, that used to be either its own riding or a separate riding, which is an entirely liberal base that is now part of his riding. So that happened, I think, in late 2023. It got rezoned or whatever they call it. And that is most definitely what happened there. You know, he just got basically his riding is changed into a liberal hotbed, and it's unfortunate that he didn't almost maybe consider that and pick up a different riding from the outset. Maybe he thought he could overcome it, but unfortunately, like I said, it wasn't even particularly close. So an Alberta riding certainly is perhaps better suited for Poilievre,
Yep.
and he'll get back. Oh, did you see today as well? Actually, that I didn't realize they were going to do this, but they announced Andrew Scheer as the interim leader until and if Pierre gets a seat.
I did not see that. No, no, I was a little busy working today and setting up for this interview. But yeah, no, that's interesting. That's a good segue into my next thought because, if Pierre Poilievre loses momentum here as opposition leader, because I have a feeling he seems to have widespread party support. Like he had no problem finding somebody to volunteer. I can't overstate this enough. That MP volunteered his
Yeah,
seat. Like he
super
offered
good
it.
dude.
Yeah, exactly, right? And there's a lot of liberals that are criticizing Poilievre for this, just being like, "Oh, he couldn't win his riding, so he had to go like kick somebody out of their seat," completely ignoring the fact that Carney literally did this to Chandra Arya, right? Like,
Well, yeah, you had to find a riding to run somewhere, right? So
yeah, exactly. And there's some speculation that he was because do you remember there was they were originally going to call a by-election for Halifax and Edmonton,
yeah,
and they
I
canceled
heard
both of
that
those.
speculation. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess they figured they crunched the numbers and maybe they figured Nepean would be safest. But yeah, no, this whole Pierre Poilievre, Andrew Scheer thing, like that, he seems to have widespread support. Was my point. But I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like there's some in the conservative establishment that might have the knives out for him that want,
Well, there's always listen when you're in this kind of scenario where it's like obviously there's a vulnerability after losing an election. There's always going to be a group that are going to take that opportunity to do something about it. But I would agree that it seems pretty clear that Pierre has widespread support, um, and and it's obvious as to why. I mean, he's been a popular MP for a long time. He's super good on the mic. He's great in Parliament. He knows what he's talking about. He's great with financial aspect of things. He's just intelligent guy. And he is a popular leader, and that the election result actually does prove that, right? I mean, they just, again, with what we've stated a couple times already, with having a higher portion of the popular vote than they've had in 37 years, and gaining whatever it was, 1.5 million or 2.5 million votes or something, compared to what they had in 2021. It's hard to call that a miss, right? I mean, that's because of Pierre. So I think it would certainly be impractical to not have him on as leader. And I think if you look at who was in the leadership race the last time around, it's really not very heartwarming to think of, what the other options might be. I don't think we have any backbenchers that are just, chomping at the bit, that are realistic. I mean, you have the likes of, Leslie Lewis is an interesting choice, but I don't know that she's a charismatic enough leader to really lead us, to kind of bring us home. And who knows? So anyways, long story short, it's Pierre's party, unless he doesn't win that Alberta seat. And I don't think there's a chance in hell that happens. It's it's about as conservative of a seat as exists in the country. So
Yeah, fair enough. Like I've anybody who follows my YouTube channel will know that I sort of wear my bias on the sleeve. Like I really ramped up my videos during the election. Most of them were favorable to Pierre. I did a couple that were critical of minor things that he's done. But I respect the hell out of him because he had the balls to come out in support of the Freedom Convoy. Like I know he was a little bit too quiet during COVID. He could have taken the stance a little bit earlier, in my opinion. But the point is, he still came out in support of the Freedom Convoy at a time when it was by and large very unpopular in Canada to do so. You only had about arguably 18 to 30% of the country that were somewhat to moderately favor or extremely to moderately favorable about the Freedom
yeah,
Convoy, because most people now don't care. Most people now, they'll never say it out loud, but they now they realize man, things were kind of draconian back then. It's really bad that I supported that. Now I'm going to shut up about it and I'm never going to talk about it again. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
back then it was very unpopular to support that. And he unapologetically put that out on Twitter. He said, "Here I am in Ottawa, standing with some brave people that chose freedom over fear." That famous tweet. And then shortly after that, he wins the Conservative opposition seat, right? So it was obviously popular with that base, and I respect the hell out of him for it.
yeah. No, well said. I mean, I can't argue with that. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I do wish, he came out sooner on the COVID stuff. But one thing that I criticize him for, but also from purely political perspective, I understand. You got to play to the winds of society, if you will. And if you I guess jump on something too quickly, maybe buries the party, right? Maybe they become um, they didn't want to become the party that was anti-science or anti this or anti that. It probably just politically, it was just easier to not do that and kind of wait for the tide to turn a little bit. And he did, and he played that card. So, I do, and this is something that I think we give too much leeway to Max Bernier for, because a lot of us are quite fond of his perspectives on things and his takes and what he says, and I'm one of them. But I also sort of had that bit of a light bulb moment earlier this year when I was like, you know what? Because I think someone else said this. I was like, you know what? That's absolutely right. He has the luxury of having zero chance of forming government or even winning a seat. So he doesn't have to be careful with his words. He can just say whatever the hell he wants. I can assure you that if Max Bernier had a shot at winning, he would be much more cautious with the words that he chose and the positions that he took. I'm not saying that he wouldn't still be, whatever, more, outspoken on immigration and that sort of thing. But I guarantee you wouldn't get the same Max Bernier that you have today. because because you're not going to win. You're not going to win enough Canadian votes if you have those more. I'm going to call them fringe views, even though I consider those my views, so I'm okay with that. But they're fringe in the sense of the majority doesn't feel that way. So therefore, if you're trying to win an election, you can't just be spewing a bunch of stuff that the majority doesn't agree with to some degree, or you're not going to win an election. So I
Or
try and give Pierre a little bit of grace for not doing everything or saying everything that I believe is favorable. Because if he did, like if it was me running, I wouldn't have a hope in hell in winning. I wouldn't win anywhere probably, because I'm probably just too outspoken about those key items, and I'm just not going to get enough centrist type support to win, right? So you got to play politics as a game, and you got to play it.
yeah, absolutely. And Aaron O'Toole, getting back to him, like he was so disappointing
Useless.
during that election campaign because that was like the snap election in 21 that Trudeau called, right? Like he
Yeah.
knew that Canadians were terrified of their own shadow during COVID. The vaccine mandates were about to kick in officially everywhere, and Trudeau was using that moment of fear. And I was really hoping that somebody was going to stick up for me a little bit. And all O'Toole said was like, "Oh well, no, I think the federal vaccine mandate is ridiculous. Nobody should be forced. Like the unvaccinated should have to test every day before work. You know what I mean? Like he
Right.
just wasn't like hard enough
Yeah.
on it. Yeah, that's one of I'll always regret not telling my boss to go get fucked when I ended up taking both of those needles and I'm fine. The important thing is that I never let my kids get it, and yeah, it was just a dark time. And had I anticipated the Freedom Convoy, I would have absolutely just made a new plan. But
Yeah, I know, man. I look, no judgment. I mean, it is what it is, right? Everyone had to make the decision for themselves. And but look, I stand firmly by the fact that I don't think there is a single human being on Earth that regrets not getting it. I'm willing to bet that there's lots of people that regret getting it, or at least strongly wish they didn't have to, or whatever, however you want to frame that. So I think that speaks volumes.
yeah, well, it's funny. I was going to ask you, do you regret not getting it?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I definitely wish I rolled up those sleeves. No, look, I mean, I'm of the um, I'm just one of those kinds of people, and for better or worse, luckily I didn't have to make this kind of choice. But like there wasn't an employer or an employment opportunity or whatever that could have forced me to get that. I would have rather lived on the street. If it's just, that's just me. I'm not saying that that's intelligent, but that is, I'd rather live with my conviction, and whatever that results in, than live with the, I don't know, it's not even guilt. I don't even know what the right term is, but with just the idea that my bodily integrity and my own personal sovereignty had to be invaded, um, for some reason, whether it was to keep a job or whatever. So I mean, I luckily my employer at the time was good enough with it, and I work from home anyway, so that part of it worked out. I'm an avid traveler, but I may do. I've got as I say, I don't know how interesting of a story it is, but my own story, anyways, of traveling back into Canada in 2021, during the time when you were supposed to have Arrive Can and all that. And I
Arrive
remember,
scam. Yes.
yeah, Arrive Scam, yeah. I got to the, so, when you come in from an international travel, you've got to line up and you got to talk to the border, the customs agent or whatever before you can go get your bags. And of course, I get up and it's my turn. And first thing they asked me, where are you coming from? Are you vaccinated? And I just said, yeah, sorry, dude, I'm not going to answer that question. And I actually told him, I said, look, I fully understand that my unwillingness to provide you that information will result in me being treated as though I am unvaccinated, and I'll have to live by those, requirements, which meant you had to go home for, to do the whole 14-day thing, and they would call you and all that. And I was prepared for that. I was fine with that. But the power hungry border agent was not happy with that at all, and he made a bit of a big deal out of it. Like he was raising his voice quite a lot so that other people in the line were well aware that I was the one holding up the line. And when I refused to comply, I then had to go and talk to a public health agent or whatever they were called, but it was like a public health representative. And it was funny enough, the public health rep was actually really good. I told him what I said. I said, look, I have no problem complying with the what I have to do based on if you are unvaccinated. I'm just not willing to tell you and write it on paper and answer your question. Simple as that. You don't get to know that about me. It's none of your business, but I will comply with the understanding that if I'm not going to tell you that I am, then there's rules. Like I can't leave the house for 14 days after I come back. I'm all good with that. He's like, oh, okay. Well, if you're not arguing that, then that's fine. We'll just X this out here. You can sign here and we'll just, you'll get your phone calls and that. And I remember it was kind of funny actually, because the border agent had to come back over afterwards. And he was a little bit sheepish because I feel like it didn't maybe go the way that he thought it was going to go. So anyways,
Well, he
I was on my way
he
after
probably
that,
wanted you to get arrested or something, right? Like,
right.
ridiculous,
Yeah,
dude.
But that was my one time where I got to stand up a little bit, I guess, for myself on that front, and whatnot. But look, anyways, we got off on a bit of a tangent there. But yeah, we each deal with those things in our own way. But I'm happy to hear that your kids are healthy anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so am I so far, right? But
fair.
yeah, I don't know, man. I think objectively, like, I don't think it was like, you know, I don't think this is like a ticking time bomb in people that's going to get everybody. But I think it's probably one of the most ill-advised pharmaceutical products I've ever seen roll out in my lifetime. And, I think that there was, honestly, I think on the part of the manufacturers, I think there was a good faith effort to sort of mitigate the damage that they did in creating this virus. And, if it causes a few heart attacks, no skin off their nose. It's like the medical equivalent of the Ford Pinto, right? Maybe letting COVID go unchecked would be too expensive for them. So maybe we'll release this thing that's maybe going to save some people and maybe not. Who knows,
Yeah,
right?
I think it was all part and parcel. Honestly, I don't think there was any. I think there was zero positive influence involved here. I think I've said this before, but I am a absolute 100% believer that the COVID virus was created, purposely released at the military games in Wuhan. And I think that the only regret of it was that it wasn't as deadly as they thought it was going to be, which is why things became such a shit show. Because why are we being locked down and all this when actually nothing is really happening? And people were starting to see through that. I think the intent of this was that it was actually supposed to be genuinely terrifying and deadly and killing people, and it actually just didn't. But they still, had the vaccine ready to go, and that still made a lot of people billions of dollars. And I'm less convinced, I guess, that the vaccine itself was purposely intended to harm people. But I certainly think that there was no care in the world about whether it did or not. It was just, it was created there. You could manipulate the numbers enough to justify some level of efficacy. And we can give it to literally almost every human being on the planet at literally pulling hundreds of billions of tax dollars from the economy into a few small hands. And as we all know, the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world happened during COVID, and that was a big part of it. So
Yeah, 100%. Like there's absolutely no justification for people my age being like forced to take it. It's like, especially considering having had COVID unvaccinated and being fine. Like there's
the fact
absolutely
that it's still on the market, number one, and the fact that it's not only on the market, but still in many cases being advocated for 6-month-olds, let alone anyone else. Like, it's just unfathomable that we're literally halfway through 2025 and not really anything has changed on that front. There hasn't really been any big breakthrough Even with, I know maybe I have some hope in RFK, but at the same time, he probably has to play his cards tightly and can't just, become the the head of HHS and then like a month later start declaring vaccines deadly because no one would be all right with that. It has to at least, I guess, look like he's doing a bunch of research or something. But I'm hoping something comes out of that on the COVID front, because those vaccines just can't stay unchecked and be, again, the fact that they're 6 months old taking it, like at this day and age when everyone knows now that the risk to anyone who doesn't have a gross number of comorbidities and deadly conditions, there's just zero risk. There's zero risk to any human being of basically any age that is healthy. So therefore, it's just wild. It's just wild that there's really been no policy change most of the world over. And like I said, we're still jabbing kids as a matter of just regular vaccine occurrence. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah, like to speak to your point about elderly people with a severe amount of comorbidities. Excuse me. Like I think that there's probably an argument to be made that perhaps the vaccine has saved some of those people. I'd be willing to hear that argument, like if you showed me convincing data on it. But like the fact of the matter is that like even with informed consent, like these people should have been like public health should have been a lot more honest with people from the get-go. They should have said, "Okay, we have this experimental vaccine. Like it has, I'm going to butcher the exact numbers, but like there's a 1 in 10,000% chance that you will get myocarditis if you take this." It's like, so therefore, people under 70 do so at your own risk, but people over 70, especially if you have like diabetes, cancer, morbid obesity, like it makes a little bit more sense to you, but again, take at your own risk. Like
Yeah, the cost benefit. You
all
weigh
it
the
should have
risk,
been.
right?
Yeah.
But you're talking logic, Johnny. You're talking what you would do in a normal situation. This was none of that, right? This isn't like they made a mistake. This was and still is like on purpose, and it's still crazy, right? Like it's still, I guess, going on to this day, where for any other type of medication where you had, it's realistic. I'm pretty sure there's lots of different numbers floating out there, but I've seen studies that it's more like 1 in 2,500 doses. So most people getting two, that's like only 1 in 1,200 people, if you will, are having some kind of serious adverse reaction, not just myocarditis, but there's a few others that go along with it. Some people look at that don't know any better and like, geez, 1 in 2,000, 5,000, whatever. That's not very much. It's a small percentage. It's like, yeah, but when you are vaccinating an entire population of billions of people, that's a lot of people. And for most medical interventions, I forget what the threshold is, but like for most vaccines in the past and like other medications, I think the threshold is normally something like 1 in 50,000 or 1 in 100,000 or something. And if it's any worse than that, then like
Yeah, it gets pulled immediately.
You don't do that, right? But the narrative got changed, and but again, it's still the same, right? And that's the biggest wow factor, is how silently, while we have all this information 5 years later, we know how dangerous COVID is or isn't. We know who's at risk from it, which is, typically older people with comorbidities. Even younger people with comorbidities aren't really at risk. That's why the average age of death of a COVID patient was basically exactly the same age as the average age of death normally, because it's just affecting older people that are pretty much going to die anyways, but maybe got helped along a little bit faster. If they had cancer or something, maybe they would have lived another 6 months or something. But in my opinion, I don't think, it didn't really change the death rate of the world at all. And that's telling, right? In a pandemic that supposedly killed millions of people, but somehow it didn't. There's other stats, like other death stats, that show that the average rate of people dying or the average age of people dying hasn't changed. That's kind of wild. But again,
Do you have
you
this
know,
book, Patrick? I just had to reach for it here.
Diary of a Psychosis, New Public Health. No, I didn't.
This is a
No.
fantastic book. If the world goes Fahrenheit 451 and like for some like you know what I mean, they censor the internet. Conversations like this can't happen. The new media, all the archives get deleted from YouTube. You have no reference point, and you can save one book for a future generation to explain all of this. I like
That's the one.
this isn't a plug, by the way. This is just a great book. So it's by Tom Woods. He's a libertarian podcaster. Jay Bhattacharya actually writes the foreword to this book, and
Okay, nice.
it's a chronological like sequencing of events of his notes through COVID. You know what I mean? Like I'll flip open a page, for instance. It's May 7th, 2020. Look who else says we need to open up. You know what I mean? August 7th, 2020. How to panic people with BS numbers. And like it's just full of data that demonstrates that, you know what I mean? Like there's no difference between lockdown and like more freedom oriented states. He has this great breakdown in there where he has two graphs, right? But he takes the dates off of the graphs, and he has this whole presentation where he says, "All right, guys, we were told that we're going to get a major spike at Thanksgiving. Can anybody demonstrate where Thanksgiving is?" And then people, they'll point to obviously it's right here. No, that's not Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is here. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
it's just a fantastic book. Dave Smith actually gifted that to Chris Cuomo when he did the debate with him. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, that's actually what spurred me to order it. But yeah,
Oh, I'll take a look at that for sure. But no, but listen, like just to tie off that thought, I mean, I'm actually genuinely surprised that they haven't just kind of quietly, I guess, toned it down, like sort of just without any fanfare or anything, just sort of, you know, stopped recommending it for kids, maybe started messaging it for, now that COVID's gone through the population, you only really, we're going to focus more on the at-risk people, older people, comorbidities, but nope, they haven't done any of that. They're not really like, there's not big campaigns for it anymore, but they're still jabbing babies. You know what I mean? And they're still recommending it across the board. So that I find truly, it's just wild. I don't even have an explanation. I'm surprised that it hasn't taken its course yet and quietly fizzled out. It hasn't, and I don't know at this point. I don't think it. What else could it possibly take aside from an RFK of the world to say like absolutely not. We're pulling these from the market, or you're only allowed to take it if you're over 70 or whatever the case is. But even then, if that happened, that would only impact the U.S. because everyone else would just say, well, RFK is a lunatic, so we're not going to change our health
yeah,
policy. We certainly,
exactly.
you know what I mean? So um, I don't know. I've just little hope for that. Luckily, what other people choose to do with their lives is um, not my problem. So it doesn't affect me in this moment anymore. But not that I still don't have probably friends and family that are lining up to take it every 6 months. I don't really know because it doesn't get talked about so much. But um, disappointing. But nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Listen, Patrick, we've almost done 2.5 hours. I think that's as a good a time as any to wrap. I think, man. But I really appreciate you coming on. We covered a whole different range of topics, and I appreciate everybody listening. So, again, I'd like you to let everybody know where they can find your posts.
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty active everywhere, but I would say most active in that I have most people who follow me are on Facebook. So facebook.com/infactns. Also on x.com/infactns, and also if you're interested in Telegram, my Telegram channel is t.me/infactchannel.
Awesome, Patrick. It's great to have you on again, man. And everybody, as always, if you like what you see here, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.